bits. The next bit is can be equally as tricky. So I want to talk a bit about what the body does and how it moves. And I mentioned at the start when I was talking about the path that the club goes on. So the definition of the club being on plane that we're working with is that whichever end of the club is lowest to the ground should point somewhere along this target line unless it's parallel to it. The easiest way for me to be able to control the path of the club shaft and club head is to control the movement of my right arm. So one of the keys in putting that we talk about is that the right arm and the shaft are in the same line or same plane. And with putting, it's actually both arms. So both the left and the right are in the same plane. The reason for that is that it's the easiest way to control the movement of the shaft of the putter. With chipping, I want to have, when I'm playing a chip shot, I want to set up so that my right arm and the shaft are in the same plane, and then they stay there through the shot. So if I set myself up here, if I'm playing a chip shot at address, my right forearm is pointing to the line, my right forearm points to the line all the way back and all the way through. With a full swing, I want the right forearm is pointing nowhere near that target line, but once I get down to about here somewhere, I want the forearm to point to that target line and trace a line along it. And if I do that, the club will behave itself. So it's important that my right forearm operates properly. So then the why question, or the how question, is how do I get my right forearm to work on the correct path? What's the easiest way for me to do that? And the easiest way is actually to have your right shoulder operating properly. So when I asked about swing plane before, a number of you talked about what you'd seen on video and all that sort of thing. Imagine that you're looking at a two-dimensional image of me, and I'm going to hit this ball. At the top of my swing, we draw, as a two-dimensional image, a line from my hands to the ball. That line should appear to run through my right shoulder. Remember, two-dimensional image. When I start my downswing, I don't want my right shoulder to come above that line, nor do I want it to drop below it. I want my right shoulder to move down that line. So the movement of my right shoulder is going to control where my forearm goes to a large extent. So the next how question, how do I get my right shoulder to operate correctly? What I need it to do is if I get to the top of the swing and from here, let's say my hips do this, I've got no chance. So I need to allow my hip movement to accommodate that shoulder action. So this is how it all fits together. So the hip movement will allow my right shoulder or my shoulders to work correctly. My shoulders working correctly control what my arms do, and what my arms do controls the path of the club. So if you ever watch players who slice, when they get to the top of the swing, the club moves out this way and then across the ball, so they finish up slicing it. If you have a look, you'll see that everything's out. The forearm will come in too high, so rather than pointing down toward that target line. The shoulders coming in too high rather than being in the correct position. Quite likely the right hip is too high, throwing everything out instead of being where it should be. Okay. So the way that the hips and the shoulders work is that when I set myself up, my hips are pretty level, but my right shoulder is going to be lower than my left because my body's tilted slightly in address. When I get back to the top of the swing, you can see that my right hip's higher than my left and my right shoulder's higher than my left. So you can see that at the top of the swing. And that's simply because my right leg is reasonably straight and my left leg's bent more. Makes sense. From there, as the club swings down, my right shoulder moving on that correct path has the feeling of my body really tilting. So as I'm approaching the ball, now my my shoulders are really tilted. My left shoulder is much higher than my right, and my left hip is higher than my right hip. So all of this needs to occur to actually accommodate the correct movement. And the nice thing is that you shouldn't have to force all that to happen. If your pivot movement is centered, then that will happen. If we apply that into the golf swing, as the club's swinging down to the ball, as I'm applying pressure to the ground, I can also feel like my upper legs are trying to squeeze together. So when I swing down and through, my upper legs are quite close together. Now, for a couple of you that had some lateral movement in the swing, you might find that a little bit of a challenge. For those of you who were losing your balance a little bit during the swing, you'll also find that a challenge. You know, if the knees are sort of floating around, it's actually quite difficult to do that. But as you get the hang of it, you'll find that centered feeling of the pivot becomes quite strong. Okay.